El Cártel Santa Rosa de Lima, una de las organizaciones del narcotráfico más violentas de México, tiene como líder a una mujer, Karen Lisbeth Yepes Ortiz.
On January 11, 2020, a horrifying incident shocked Mexico when armed assailants linked to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, stormed a wedding at Our Lady of San Juan Church in Celaya, Guanajuato. The attackers, targeting the bride due to her brother's gang ties, opened fire, killing her on the spot and abducting her groom. The brutal attack, which took place in front of terrified guests, underscored the extreme violence plaguing the country. The CJNG, led by the infamous Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, is considered Mexico's most dangerous criminal organization. Once a police officer, El Mencho has now eclipsed even Joaquin El Chapo Guzman as the country's most feared cartel leader. The bride, Karen Elizabeth Yepes Ortiz, was the sister of Jose Antonio Yepes Ortiz, alias El Marro, head of the rival Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. The two groups have been locked in a bloody feud over control of fuel theft operations in Guanajuato. According to reports, the gunmen arrived in multiple vehicles just as the ceremony was ending, firing indiscriminately. In the chaos, the bride was fatally shot, while her groom, a known cartel member nicknamed El Calamardo, was taken hostage. The assailants, wearing bulletproof vests marked with the CJNG insignia, escaped in a hail of gunfire, tragically killing an innocent bystander, an 18-year-old motorcyclist caught in the crossfire. Following the attack, the CJNG released videos mocking El Marro for fleeing the scene and leaving his sister behind. The Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, known for stealing fuel from pipelines, had previously hung a threatening banner demanding the withdrawal of government forces, a move El Marro later denied, instead accusing the CJNG. Critics argue his denial was an attempt to deflect blame, especially after abandoning his sister during the attack. This wedding massacre occurred just a day after another shocking CJNG-related killing, the murder of Maria Guadalupe Lopez Esquivel, known as La Catrina, or the Dame of Death, further highlighting the cartel's ruthless tactics.
Did this convicted hitman take out mob boss Whitey Bulger?
In October 2018, James Whitey Bulger, Boston's most infamous mob boss, was transferred to Hazleton Federal Prison in West Virginia, a facility so grim it's known as Misery Mountain. At 89, Bulger was a far cry from the ruthless kingpin who once ruled South Boston's underworld.
He was the scariest criminal I ever came across. You could see it in his eyes. He just had that stare in his eyes, 1,000-yard look. He was just ruthless. He was just ruthless.
For years, he had manipulated the system, secretly informing on rival criminals while expanding his own empire. He was the most terrifying criminal I ever encountered, one source recalled. That cold, dead stare, pure ruthlessness. His reign finally collapsed after 16 years as a fugitive, ending in a conviction for 11 murders.
The criminal turned FBI informant who was captured after 16 years on the run was found dead this morning in a federal prison in West Virginia.
But for the criminal world, his real sin was worse, breaking their ironclad rule, never cooperate with the FBI. His arrival at Hazleton was essentially a death sentence. In prison, informants are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and Bulger wasn't just any snitch. He was arguably the most notorious FBI collaborator in U.S. history. He never even made it to his first meal. Just hours after being placed in his cell, inmates brutally attacked him. They beat him savagely with a sock stuffed with padlocks, then tried to gouge out his eyes and cut out his tongue. The message was unmistakable. This is the fate of those who see too much and talk too much. The man who spent decades playing both sides ultimately learned the hard way. In the end, you have to pick a side, and Whitey Bulger had chosen wrong.
Tranquila, mija, ya viene el helicóptero por ti. Ya viene el helicóptero. Tranquila, hija, tranquila. Vas a estar bien. Trata de aguantar, ¿eh?
In January 2020, Maria Guadalupe Lopez Esquivel, better known as La Catrina, leaned against a blood-smeared wall in Michoacan, Mexico, her life slipping away from a gunshot wound to the neck. Just hours before, she had been a feared cartel leader, commanding her own squad of assassins while flaunting her lavish lifestyle on social media. Now, as she struggled to breathe, a soldier she had been fighting moments earlier cradled her, offering what little comfort he could in her final moments. Born into poverty in Tepalcatepec, Lopez Esquivel grew up idolizing the glamorized portrayals of female narcos in television dramas. Determined to escape her circumstances, she set her sights on becoming one of Mexico's most powerful cartel bosses. Her big break came in 2017 when she crossed paths with Miguel LM2 Fernandez, a high-ranking enforcer for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. Under his mentorship, she evolved from a small-town girl into a cold-blooded sicaria, using her striking looks and social media savvy to cultivate an intimidating persona. With her Instagram feed filled with provocative poses, designer outfits, and high-powered weapons, La Katrina amassed a following drawn to her dangerous allure. But behind the curated posts, she was climbing the CJNG's ranks, eventually leading her own team of hitmen. Her most infamous act came in October 2019, when she masterminded an ambush that left 13 police officers dead in Aguililla. The massacre earned her the nickname La Katrina, a reference to Mexico's iconic skeletal Dame of Death, a moniker she proudly tattooed on her thigh as a symbol of her ruthlessness. By 21, her luck had run out. Cornered by security forces in La Bocanada, she was critically wounded in a shootout. The once polished social media star now lay dying, her designer clothes drenched in blood as soldiers rushed her to a helicopter. She didn't survive the flight, becoming yet another casualty in Mexico's brutal cartel wars. Her death signaled a shift in the narco underworld. Women could rise to the same heights as men, but they faced the same brutal downfall. Today, her Instagram remains online, a haunting digital shrine to the seductive yet fatal appeal of cartel life, and a stark reminder that in this world, no one's reign lasts forever. Let's go back to December 2nd, 1993. The midday sun scorched a humble house tucked away in Medellin, Colombia. Inside, Pablo Escobar was on the phone with his family, his final call as the most feared and powerful drug lord on earth. Moments later, his reign would come to a bloody end.
He was hit 3 times. He was wounded. He continued fire.
Not long before this, Escobar seemed untouchable. His fortune was beyond comprehension. Mansions dotted across Colombia, and even a self-designed luxury prison.
Right off the bat, you knew that this man was not a millionaire. He was a billionaire.
Forbes had him listed among the wealthiest men alive. Escobar wasn't just rich, he was billionaire-level untouchable, but everything had changed. The DEA had been chipping away at his fortress of power. His inner circle was crumbling, picked off one by a ruthless vigilante group called Los Pepes, short for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. These weren't ordinary enemies. They were survivors and family members of his countless victims, and they were out for blood.
They pretty much stripped him of much of his organization.
Well, it was to our advantage. You got to give Los Pepes a lot of credit for Pablo Escobar's demise.
Bit by bit, they dismantled his empire. Los Pepes deserve a lot of credit for bringing
With
Pablo
his empire
down,
crumbling, Escobar
As
started
pressure
making
mounted,
mistakes.
Escobar began slipping. He made sloppy mistakes, careless phone calls, risky decisions, and emotional outbursts that made it clear he was unraveling. And the
That would
DEA,
normally
they
be
sensed
reserved
his
for
desperation
rookies.
made it obvious. We knew we were closing in, they recalled. Then came December. Radio signals intercepted by authorities led them straight to his location. Police stormed the building, and Escobar, alongside his last loyal enforcer, Limon, fled to the roof. But this time, there was nowhere to run. A fierce but brief shootout erupted. Escobar returned fire with everything he had, but it wasn't enough. 3 bullets brought him down. As the dust settled, a voice crackled over the police radio. Viva Colombia, we've just killed Pablo Escobar. The king had fallen.
First message transferred over the radio was, Viva Colombia, matamos a Pablo Escobar. Long live Colombia, we've just killed Pablo Escobar.
Yet his violent legacy still echoes through history. That final rooftop shootout became a symbol of a truth no empire can escape. When the world decides to take you down, not even billions can save you.
De muertes. Destacan diversas líneas de investigación que apuntan a que estuvo involucrado en el atentado contra elementos de la Policía Federal mediante la explosión de un coche bomba en julio de 2010, en virtud de haber sido quien aportó los explosivos para confeccionar el artefacto.
Jocelyn Alejandra Niño was a feared assassin working for the Gulf Cartel until her identity was exposed online, sealing her fate in the most brutal way imaginable. Known on the streets as La Flaca, or the Skinny One, Jocelyn earned the nickname due to her slim build. But the name carried a deeper meaning as well, referencing La Santa Muerte, Our Lady of Holy Death, a folk saint worshipped by many in Mexico's criminal underworld. Yet Jocelyn wasn't the only one to carry this cursed title. In the bloody world of Mexican cartels, at least 2 other women known as La Flaca also met horrifying ends, as if the nickname itself came with a death sentence. In Mexico's cartel circles, women like Jocelyn are often recruited not just for their loyalty, but for their looks. Their beauty becomes a tool, used to blend in, to charm, and to deceive. Many begin their criminal journey as lookouts or escorts, gradually rising through the ranks to become full-fledged enforcers. Jocelyn's name burst into public view on January 5, 2015. That day, a photo of her was anonymously leaked to Vallepur, Tamaulipas, a social media account run by citizen journalists exposing cartel activity and security threats. The image went viral across Facebook and Twitter. In it, Jocelyn appeared with a soft, almost innocent smile, but in her hands was a high-powered weapon, and she wore a bulletproof vest. There was no mistaking what she was: a sicaria, a hitwoman for the Gulf Cartel, operating out of Rio Bravo in the border state of Tamaulipas. Authorities later concluded that the leak came from within the cartel itself, specifically from someone tied to Los Metros, a rival faction at war with Los Ciclones, the unit Jocelyn was aligned with. This internal feud had escalated violently, and the leak seemed designed to expose and endanger Los Ciclones members by revealing their identities to both law enforcement and rival killers. Jocelyn had been actively involved in defending Los Ciclones' territory from Los Metros incursions in Rio Bravo, a city heavily dominated by the Metros. This put her in extreme danger, and once her face was made public, it was only a matter of time before the enemies came for her. That time came on April 12, 2015. Jocelyn and two of her comrades were captured by Los Metros. They were never seen alive again. A day later, police in Matamoros discovered a horrifying scene: Jocelyn's dismembered body stuffed into an ice chest, abandoned in a parking lot outside a Soriana supermarket. Nearby, in plastic bags, were more human remains, belonging to another woman and a decapitated man, both believed to be part of Los Ciclones. The bodies had clear signs of prolonged torture, suggesting the victims were interrogated, likely for information about cartel operations, before being slaughtered. Jocelyn's remains were only identifiable because of a distinctive tattoo on her arm that bore her last name, Nino. But the cruelty didn't stop there. Los Metros posted grisly photos of the victims online as a direct warning. One image showed Jocelyn, visibly beaten, lying on the ground next to the other captives just before they were killed. Another showed her remains inside the cooler. Alongside the pictures was a chilling message: "This will happen to every filthy person who supports Los Ciclones." The note also mocked Los Ciclones for employing female gunmen and promised more bloodshed for anyone who dared cross into their turf. Santiago Meza Lopez, better known as El Pozolero, or the Soup Maker, had seen horrors most couldn't imagine. As the Sinaloa cartel's go-to man for body disposal, Lopez was said to have dissolved over 300 people in acid. But in 2009, the man who specialized in making others disappear would come face-to-face with his own terrifying reality.
¿Cuánto tiempo estuviste haciendo todo esto?
Como 9, 10 años.
¿Y en ese tiempo cuántos cuerpos?
De 300.
Amarillo toda.
Vamos con el alambre, vamos con el alambre. Vamos por el alambre.
Lopez had carved out a chilling role for himself within the brutal machinery of Mexico's drug war, erasing people so completely that it was as if they never existed. For him, the absence of a body meant no evidence, and no evidence meant no case, no charges, no consequences. This gruesome method wasn't new. Cartels across Mexico had used it for years, honing it into a dark science. Victims were often tortured first, sometimes for information, sometimes simply out of cruelty. Afterward, they were either killed or, in some of the most horrifying instances, submerged alive in vats of acid. Lopez approached the task like a twisted craftsman. He used industrial-sized barrels filled with a powerful chemical cocktail he had refined over time. This blend could break down everything: flesh, organs, bones, until nothing remained but a thick, dark sludge. Within hours, a human being would be reduced to an unrecognizable liquid, ready for disposal. But being the man who handled the cartel's darkest secrets came at a cost. Lopez didn't just know how to eliminate bodies, he also knew the full extent of the cartel's blood-soaked operations. He carried names, dates, methods, and motives in his mind. And in a world where silence is survival, that level of knowledge made him a marked man. When he was arrested in 2009, Lopez confessed to dissolving more than 300 victims. But shortly after his confession, he disappeared without a trace. Many now believe he met the same gruesome fate he dealt to others, dumped into one of his own acid-filled barrels, making him victim number 301. His vanishing was rich in symbolism. In Mexican tradition, a proper burial is sacred, necessary for a soul's peaceful passage to the afterlife. By completely destroying the body, the cartels weren't just killing people. They were severing their spiritual journey, leaving their souls in limbo. And so, the man who once made hundreds vanish without a trace vanished himself. All that remained were rumors, urban legends, and chilling tales of acid, barrels, and the executioner who became his own final victim.
6 de la mañana con 45 minutos. Mil gracias por estar en sintonía de Telediario al Amanecer. Recuerda que hace un mes Marixa Lemus, alias La Patrona, se fugó por segunda vez.
Alias La Patrona de la cárcel militar Mariscal Zavala.
On February 18, 2011, just months before local elections, Mayra Lemus, a mayoral candidate in a border town near El Salvador, sat down for lunch at a hotel alongside key figures from her campaign. But their meal was abruptly interrupted when two pickup trucks screeched to a halt outside. Armed men leapt out and opened fire in broad daylight. The ambush was swift and merciless. 8 people were gunned down, including Mayra herself. This wasn't the first attempt on her life. Back in June 2006, Mayra and several family members were attacked when gunmen opened fire on their vehicle. She survived, but tragically, her niece didn't. But who would dare to target a woman whose very name was synonymous with fear? Mayra wasn't just a politician. She was feared as a killer. Residents whispered that she alone decided who lived and who died. Her grip over the region's drug trade was ironclad, and her reputation for ruthlessness sent chills down the spines of even hardened criminals. She eliminated anyone who got in her way, without hesitation, without mercy. No one was safe, not rivals, not friends, not even family. Rumors swirled that she had murdered her own husband and dumped his body in a remote area. Though his remains were never recovered and no charges were filed, the suspicion alone added another dark chapter to her legend. Mayra didn't just dominate the streets, she controlled the local government, law enforcement, and seemed to have her sights set on even broader power. At the time of her assassination, the Flores family was one of only 2 factions left in the race for mayor. Her younger sister, Marixa, was close by when the attack occurred. As soon as the shots rang out, she raced toward the scene in her armored vehicle. But it was already too late. Mayra was dead. Marixa was devastated and furious. In her mind, only one man could be behind the hit, Roberto Marroquin Fuentes, Mayra's political rival and a man known to head his own criminal organization. Determined to settle the score, Marixa launched 3 separate assassination attempts against him. Somehow, he survived all of them. But before she could strike again, Marixa was captured and thrown into prison. Still, whispers inside and outside those prison walls suggest she hasn't given up. Rumor has it, she's simply waiting, planning for the right moment to escape and fulfill her vow of vengeance for her slain sister.
Is investigating the stabbing death of an inmate. According to investigators, 2 inmates, Juan Martinez and Ray Martinez, attacked and killed 59-year-old Michael Torres.
Let's go back to July 6, 2023. Michael "The Fly" Torres steps into the yard at California State Prison in Sacramento. What he didn't know was that within the hour, he'd be betrayed in a savage ambush by the very organization he once helped lead.
To it, you become a liability. Why? Because you know too much. So what they'll do to cover their asses, they'll eliminate you. If you go back into history, 99% of the victims of the Mexican Mafia have been their own members.
A respected high-ranking member of the Mexican Mafia, Torres had transformed himself into a behind-bars kingpin. This wasn't some low-level prison hustle. Torres ran a highly organized criminal enterprise. From his cell, he operated like a CEO, controlling the LA County jail system and raking in thousands every week. His first major operation was called The Kitty, a sophisticated racket built on collecting and reselling commissary goods from Latino inmates. But that was just one stream of income. Torres also imposed a mandatory tax, 1/3 of all proceeds from drug sales inside the jail. It was a well-oiled system that generated a steady flow of cash, rivaling some small businesses. And he didn't do it blindly. Torres demanded spreadsheets, updates, and accountability. With smuggled phones, he ran the operation remotely and effectively, extending his grip beyond prison walls. He even taxed street-level gangs in the San Fernando and Antelope Valleys and funneled the profits into real estate and legitimate businesses. But in the prison world, power is always dangerous, and loyalty is never guaranteed.
The California State Prison is investigating the stabbing death of an inmate.
That summer day in 2023, prison officials launched an investigation into the murder of an inmate. That inmate was Torres. While standing in the yard, he was approached by 2 fellow Mexican Mafia members, Ray Martinez and Juan Anel Martinez. To outside observers, it might have looked like a casual conversation between comrades. But what followed was anything but friendly. In a flash, both men pulled out homemade blades and attacked. The ambush was swift and deadly. The man who had once ruled with absolute authority didn't even have time to defend himself. The very group that elevated him to power had turned on him, deciding that Torres was now more of a threat than an asset. Serving a staggering 133-year sentence for a range of violent crimes, including attempted murder, Torres was a third-strike offender with nowhere to run. His violent death sent a clear and chilling message through the prison corridors. In the ruthless world of organized crime, loyalty is temporary, and even the most powerful can fall when their brothers turn against them.
Pablo Escobar, wasn't for Griselda Blanco, there would be no Pablo Escobar. Period. Bar none.
Cocaine hydrochloride was starting to expand in the United States. She saw an opportunity and she took advantage of that.
In the early 1980s, Griselda Blanco ruled the Miami drug scene with unmatched brutality. Known as La Madrina, the Godmother, this Colombian queenpin was deep in the cocaine trade before Pablo Escobar had even made a name for himself. While Escobar would eventually become one of the world's most notorious drug lords, Blanco was already reigning with fear and firepower. Her enemies were many, and she showed no hesitation in eliminating them, whether through brazen mall shootouts, motorcycle assassins, or violent home invasions.
I was surprised that it was a woman, hard to fathom.
We were all surprised that a female, the Godmother, was responsible for this much violence, could be this evil.
Blanco was easily one of the deadliest women in the Colombian drug game. Authorities believe she was responsible for at least 200 killings, though some estimate that number could reach into the thousands. One former detective once said her reputation arrived before she did. She was more vicious than any of the men in the business. Her life of crime started early. At just 11 years old, she allegedly kidnapped a boy and murdered him when his parents failed to pay the ransom. After enduring abuse at home, she fled Cartagena and landed on the streets of Medellin, where she survived through petty theft and sex work. Her criminal career truly took off when she married Carlos Trujillo, a man who smuggled undocumented migrants into the U.S. They had 3 children, but the marriage ended violently. Blanco reportedly had Trujillo killed, making him the first of 3 husbands she'd dispose of. It was her second husband, Alberto Bravo, who introduced her to the booming cocaine business in the early 1970s. The couple moved to Queens, New York, where their empire exploded. With direct supply lines to Colombia, they undercut the Italian mafia and made millions. Blanco's smuggling tactics were clever. She famously used custom-made underwear worn by young female couriers to sneak drugs through airports. It was around this time she earned her infamous nickname, the Godmother. But their success drew attention. In 1975, a massive NYPD DEA operation called Operation Banshee brought down their network. Before she could be arrested, Blanco fled to Colombia. There, she confronted Bravo over missing money. According to legend, she shot him point blank in the face during a heated argument, while he managed to fire an Uzi round that hit her in the stomach. Years later, her autopsy confirmed a scar from that very bullet. Now alone and unchallenged, Blanco continued her drug trade from Colombia, flooding the U.S. with cocaine. In 1976, she allegedly smuggled a shipment aboard the Gloria, a Colombian naval ship sent to America for a bicentennial celebration. She eventually returned to Miami, where she cemented her legacy as the Queen of Cocaine. In Miami, Blanco lived extravagantly. Lavish mansions, luxury cars, even her own private jet. She threw wild parties attended by top drug figures, but she was operating in a volatile world. The late 70s and early 80s turned Miami into a battlefield, with various factions, including the Medellin cartel, competing violently for control. Between 1979 and 1984, the city became the epicenter of America's drug war, and Blanco was right at its heart. One of the most infamous incidents tied to her was the July 11, 1979 murder of a rival drug dealer at the Crown Liquor Store in Dadeland Mall. Her assassins, riding in a steel-reinforced van labeled Happy Time Complete Party Supply, stormed the mall, guns blazing. The vehicle, nicknamed the War Wagon, was fitted with gun ports and heavy armor. After law enforcement seized the van, Blanco's killers adapted, using motorcycles for quick, lethal hits, a technique she pioneered in Medellin. She was feared not just for her ruthlessness, but for her complete lack of empathy. One expert said, other criminals were cautious. They'd confirm before pulling the trigger. Blanco, she'd kill first and shrug it off later. Her top hitman, Jorge Ayala, once revealed that when she ordered a hit, everyone nearby was considered expendable. Innocents, children, it didn't matter. At the height of her power in the 1980s, Blanco was smuggling around 3,400 pounds of cocaine into the U.S. every month and controlled a billion-dollar empire. But her time at the top didn't last forever. Eventually, the DEA tracked her down and arrested her on narcotics charges. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 1994, her downfall deepened when Ayala agreed to testify against her in a major murder case. His testimony was so damning that it could have led to a death sentence, but the case unraveled after a scandal broke. Ayala had been caught having inappropriate phone conversations with female employees of the Miami-Dade DA's office. The incident discredited him as a witness. As a result, Blanco dodged the death penalty and took a plea deal. After serving her sentence, she was deported to Colombia, but freedom offered little peace. With so many enemies left in her wake, she was far from safe. On September 3, 2012, at the age of 69, Griselda Blanco was gunned down outside a butcher shop in Medellin, killed in a motorcycle drive-by, the very method she had once made infamous. Her killer was never identified. Was it someone from Escobar's old circle, a relative of one of her many victims? No one knows for sure. What's clear is this: the woman who once terrorized 2 continents with bullets and cocaine met the exact kind of end she had inflicted on so many others.